The opening sentences of today's Gospel are really interesting. We hear about Jesus going back to Galilee, and the Gospel writer John tells us that despite the fact that he's previously said that a prophet is not respected in his own home country, this time the people in Galilee show a lot more respect to Christ, and the Gospel tells us why. It says because of what they had seen of him at the festival in Jerusalem. Now, this is really, really interesting to me, and this part of the Gospels, I think, is probably a really underrated and very poorly known part of the Scriptures, because we all know the part where Jesus says a prophet is not respected in his own hometown, and usually our knowledge of that sort of issue stops right there, and we sort of think that nothing good ever came of that situation. But in actual fact, as we read today in John's Gospel, the exact opposite was true. They began to see something of Christ in Jerusalem. Their hearts and minds were opened to the profoundness of what God was doing in their midst, but it took time for that change to take place. Whenever I have heard the story about Jesus in his own hometown and how difficult he found it there, I think it can be very easy to think of this just as a geographical thing, but I've always thought of it as really about family and close associates and friends, the people who know you the best, who often think that because they know you so well, they know everything about you. And so they can fail to see the work of God that's really happening. You know, when Jesus begins his ministry, these people are like, who is this? This is just the carpenter's son, isn't it? They don't see the work of God that is happening in their midst because they are so close to this person. But here's the important bit. As we read in today's gospel, there is always hope, because sooner or later, the penny will drop. So if you're someone who has had some sort of experience, or maybe even struggling with this today, where you've had some sort of conversion experience or some sort of deepening of your relationship with God, but the people who know you closest, the people who know you best, are sort of struggling to accept and to understand what's really going on, have heart, because the exact same thing happened to Christ. But here's the important thing. You should also have hope, because it took time, but eventually what happened was people began to see that there was more going on here, that God was actually at work in their midst, and something profound and important was happening. Just like in today's gospel, where Jesus returns to Galilee, and the people now have a newfound respect for him, because their eyes have finally been opened. They have looked beyond their shallow and narrow sort of prejudice, because they think they know him so well, they're almost like they think they have ownership of him. They now see that he is something far greater than what they initially thought he was. Today's saint quoted today comes from Padre Pio, and he says this: pray, hope, and don't worry. If you're someone today who's struggling because people around you have expressed doubts about some way that God is called or is working in your life, don't worry. Don't give in to despair. You know the way in which God is working in your life. God knows the way in which he is called and is working in your life. And most importantly of all, despite the difficulties you might be experiencing right now, God will bring that work to fruition, and there will be great fruit that will come from it. So pray, hope, and don't worry.